Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest reports on how Brexit is further hampering British manufacturing this year. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, in a report from Make UK, which lobbies for British manufacturing, they surveyed their members and found that the top concerns to be delays at customs, regulatory divergence between the UK and the EU, and access to migrant workers. Now let's make this really simple. According to British manufacturers themselves, these are the top three problems facing them. This is not the pandemic. None of those are related to the pandemic. And how do you solve these problems? Well, first, delays at customs, which has happened recently. As a little aside, as I was preparing this video, I saw a tweet from someone saying that they'd had a delivery stuck in Germany, and this is 5 weeks since it's been collected. One of the pallets from Britain didn't have the right paperwork. Now, how many times did we see that last year in the other direction, where a single consignment trying to get into the EU could hold everything else up? Because obviously the EU put these customs and standards checks in place 1st of January 2021. He also said that he'd heard that UK loads go to the back of the queue if customs officers are busy or if they just can't be bothered. You know, and I've heard lots of anecdotal evidence of customs officials in the EU shoving British loads down the priority list. And this won't even just be out of spite. You know, a load from Britain is bound to be more hassle because of all the new trade barriers that have suddenly been erected or were a year ago. I can well understand someone wanting to leave it until later in the hopes that maybe it ends up having to be dealt with on the next shift and some bugger else has to sort it out. Another thing to bear in mind is that the customs systems changed overnight at the new year in this country, so in the opposite direction now, from the EU to Britain. In terms of getting EU imports into Britain, the procedure on the 31st of December was different to the 1st of January. People were not allowed to access the new systems early either. So imagine what happened to someone preparing a load in late December for delivery in early January. The delays caused in using the old system or having to wait longer to get access to the new system, which often failed anyway, would have created more problems. But anyway, I digress. Delays at customs. Whether caused by systems that aren't working well, or officials who can't be asked, or paperwork that isn't quite right, it's costing British manufacturing. It's one of their top concerns. And here's the thing, when all of those things work, there'll still be delays. You look at anywhere where there's a customs border, there's delays. There's tailbacks of miles, because that is standard. We've got tailbacks of way more miles than is standard, but that's because we've also, on top of the natural delays, got systems that aren't working yet. So how can this be fixed? One way, customs union. That's it. We form a customs union with the EU. We had a customs union with the EU and we didn't have these delays. Obviously, the one we had was best, but there are different types. There's not just such a thing as a customs union or the customs union. There's different types. For example, Turkey have a customs union with the EU. It's not as comprehensive as the one that we had. We may end up having to go through something similar, something weaker first before we have the comprehensive customs union that we used to have. But if you want to elbow customs delays, you need customs alignment. It's really just that simple. It's a fact. The second top issue was regulatory divergence. Standards, basically. We've yet to feel the full nightmare of that aspect of Brexit because although the EU are applying standards checks, we're not doing the same to EU imports into Britain. However, EU, as I say, are, so when British producers are trying to sell into the EU, they've been hit by that for just over a year now. And how do you deal with that? Regulatory alignment. Being realistic, this may be our first real step towards reversing Brexit. Obviously, the Conservatives are only going to double down and make things worse while they remain in power. Yes, just like last year, they may have to fudge or reverse a few aspects of Brexit, you know, away from the public eye, but ultimately they're going to keep doubling down. If they can be displaced, Labour have already talked about regulatory alignment in order to fix some of the problems of Brexit, or make Brexit work as they call it. I've not heard them saying anything on customs specifically, but who knows? If the public gets sufficiently hacked off about customs procedures making the price of food increase, Maybe Labour will be able to form a policy on customs union talks as well. But what we have so far is a policy for some regulatory alignment once the Conservatives are gone. So this will definitely be on the if the Tories can be beaten at the next election. The final main concern was access to migrant labour. Now, obviously, the best way to achieve this is freedom of movement around your own continent, where we have skilled workers right on our doorstep. In fact, you could combine freedom of movement with regulatory alignment, and you could form what might be called a single market. What's that? One already exists? Oh, smashing, we could join the single market again. Something else we will inevitably have to do at some point, but how long this will take is obviously dependent upon how quickly politics can be remoderated over here. Now, you could argue in this third case that you don't need freedom of movement, you just need an immigration system that makes it much easier to get the workers you need. You might be able to achieve this with a relatively free hand when it comes to issuing work visas. And indeed, the government, as I've already talked about recently, have already massively increased the number of visas they've given to countries around the world, particularly around the subcontinent, India, Philippines, and so on. And the government have talked about doing much more on that in order to get the Indian trade deal. But visas are less secure than actual freedoms for the worker, freedom of movement. And when EU workers can have that freedom to live and work in other advanced economies around Europe, there is less relative incentive to work in Britain where you've got fewer rights, because a visa can be revoked. I mean, it's not guaranteed when you apply for it, and even if it is, it can be revoked. It's not a long-term guaranteed plan in the way that freedom of movement is. But it should come as no surprise to hear these three issues being of most concern to manufacturers, because they are describing the three main advantages of being in the single market and customs union. So, of course, losing those three main advantages is going to result in three major barriers to your business. And these are just the main three concerns manufacturers have. The pandemic will also have been hitting them and will surely beast them in 2022, because the government are scaling back the use of testing and have plans to withdraw almost all restrictions in March. They base this on the notion that our hospitals will be able to cope by then and we'll all just have to get on with it. But we're talking about a stunningly infectious disease. So the consequence of this is going to be a lot of people being sick. Whether in hospital or just at home, doesn't actually matter. The point is they won't be in work. So consider this. You are a manufacturing business and you now have a number of factors that are going to make you less reliable. You are going to have more staff off than would normally have been the case before the pandemic. In fact, given the highly infectious nature of COVID, it's quite easy for an unwittingly infectious employee to come in and snook your entire department. That is going to slow down production, making it harder to meet the timeframes that you gave your customers. The next is that it will cost more to transport the goods to the customer. Way more if they're not in Britain. But even in Britain, the cost has gone up with the shortage of drivers. The next is the increased cost and potential delays in negotiating the borders that Britain has with everyone. A slight error on the forms or an error on the forms of someone else's consignment on the same lorry can hold things up. Then you are likely to need supplies imported in. Now, we are starting to apply some more robust systems at the border for EU imports that weren't there last year. There are delays, costs and difficulties with that now. You might miss deadlines by weeks with the costs increasing massively. So you're going to say to your customer, sorry, we were delayed by a month or so, and also it's going to cost you more now because it cost us a fortune. Well, they're not going to pay the extra and they're not going to be impressed with the month's delay either, which means your business model is going to start to crumble. If you can't reliably supply your customers, those customers will try and look elsewhere. Those in the single market are much more likely to succeed. So due to a general policy of fingers and ears when it comes to every pressure on manufacturing, whether it be Brexit or COVID, British manufacturers are going to be facing a very rough ride from which some may get away with a severe headache, others will not survive. When Boris Johnson said F business, he wasn't kidding, was he? But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.